My name is Susan.
Hello, Susan.
I've gotten confused about prayer since I've been studying this non-dual understanding. Partly because the nature of language is there's a subject and an object and separation. And I'd like to feel more connected to the all that is. And I'm not sure how to do that other than to talk or pray. But I'm not supplicating. I just want to be connected.
Yes, okay.
So.
Susan, there are really two distinct categories of prayer. And one is the prayer that comes from the individual. The individual prays to God, devotes themselves to God, supplicates themselves to God through language, and that's a valid form of prayer. It places the individual in the right relationship to the whole.
Like the prayer that you said yesterday.
Yes, the prayer, the Shankaracharya's prayer, would be an example of a prayer that came from the individual and that was directed towards the absolute, that places the individual in the right relationship to the absolute, one of love, adoration, and devotion. And then there's another form of prayer in which there is no room for the individual. Because as long as there is an individual being, that individual being displaces a part of God's infinite being. At some point the individual realizes, if I still exist as an individual, then there is a part of the infinite being that is not infinite, because I am a finite being. And therefore the individual comes to this intuitive recognition that there is no room for me in God's being. If God's being is infinite, God's being must be the only being there is. Therefore, I cannot be an individual being. I, as an individual being, must be an illusion. The being in myself, which seems to be temporary, finite, and separate, is an apparent limitation of the only being there is. Just as the space in this room that seems to be a limited space is only an apparently limited limitation of the only universal space there is. And that's what we did this morning. So I am is the doorway, or one of the doorways, to this second type of prayer. It is not a prayer that the individual undertakes. It is a prayer in which the individual is dissolved. It's not the individual that surrenders, it is the individual that is surrendered. And that's the ultimate prayer, the highest form of prayer. And I don't mean by that to disparage the other forms of prayer. They're beautiful. And even those that have this understanding that we have here, namely that there is only God's infinite being, there are no finite beings, may sometimes still express their love of God in dualistic terms. So the Shankaracharya's prayer would be an example of that. The Shankaracharya, I'm not talking about the original Sri Shankara, I'm talking about Shantananda Saraswati, the first teacher I had. He well knew that his being was God's being, the only being there is. But this prayer was couched in conventional dualistic terms. It's just a poetic a poetic device. So really the ultimate prayer, the ultimate devotion to God would be to sound the divine name, I am, once, and to allow oneself to be drawn into its referent. That would be the ultimate prayer, the highest devotion, the highest surrender to God.
I'm not yet at that place where I have a abiding sense of awareness of I am. Maybe little fleeting things, but I could practice that.
But you have an abiding sense of being.
Yeah.
Do you not always feel, I am myself? You always have the sense of being myself.
Yes.
Well, all you need to do is, Susan, is pay very careful attention to the experience being myself. Because the experience being myself is not an extraordinary religious, mystical experience. It's the experience that all 7.8 billion of us have. Everyone goes around all day long with the feeling of being myself. Now, what is the difference between that very common feeling and the recognition of one's true nature? It's just that most people's sense of being their self is still mixed with or colored by the content of their experience. So when we think of being myself, when we go to that experience, we think of with thoughts, feelings, sensations, relationships, activities. In other words, our sense of ourself is entangled with experience. All that's necessary is to pay careful attention to that feeling of being myself. Not my thoughts, not my feelings, not my sensations. Just the pure feeling of being myself, which is in fact just the pure feeling of being. That's it. That's the highest form of prayer. Just a pure awareness of being. The feeling of being. So it's it couldn't be easier or simpler. And it's not something that's foreign to us, or that we have to acquire. Everyone is having the awareness of being all the time, although in most cases the awareness of being is mixed with the awareness of experience. So all that's necessary is just to go to that pure experience of being. That's why I try to evoke that experience this morning. It's the first experience we have, it's the last experience we have, and in fact it's the experience that runs underground throughout our lives. It's not something, that feeling of being that we have on first being born, before we've opened our eyes or if had any memories. It's not something extraordinary. It's not even something we have to practice. It's just that innate sense of being. Well, it's true that once we have allowed ourselves to be lost in experience, then we do seem then to have to practice being. But in time, this practice of being begins to subside in just being. That is devotion to God. Just being.
Thank you, Rupert. Thank you.